I know I've only got 20 minutes. And I'm not going to be able to get through everything, so I'm just going to try to hit the highlights. The first thing to notice is that the title of the actual paper that I wrote is completely different than the title on the program. And that happens to me all the time because I think I'm going to do something, and when I sit down to start writing it, it goes in a different direction. And so I like the saying, I write in order to find out what I think. And I think that's the way it goes. And so when I was writing this thing in my own mind, I was trying to, figure out what to say and hopefully say it in the simplest way possible. But I'm working on a book basically that has this as a centerpiece. And the book title is going to be, I like it, I create these titles, called Follow the Money. And the subtitle is The Laws of Supplies, plural, and Demands, plural. But anyway, so Follow the Money, I think, is a good way to better understand economic theory. So I am going to talk about theoretical things because I'm an economist. I'm usually the only economist that comes to these kind of conferences. And I think there's a very good reason for that. And the reason for that is that economists, I hate to say, no, I don't hate to say, but I have to say that economists are not helpful for you at all. And matter of fact, quite the contrary, they're going to prevent you from understanding the things that we're talking about, including this morning. So I've got these slides. I'm not going to say everything that's on there because I'd go over my allotted time. So I've spent the last 40-some years trying to understand the history of silver over a limited period of time, a few centuries. And so I'm an economist coming at it so from an econ side, but I'm really became interested in the history. And so the first thing I did that any economist would do is take the standard models and apply them to history and see if it'll help you to sort through the confusing mess of history. And it turns out that the standard models prevent you from understanding what's going on. And I want to just state a few reasons for this. And so I spent a lot of time, 35 years, I retired a year ago, at University of the Pacific, and mostly teaching, well, entirely undergrads, and teaching a lot of intro econ. So I'm teaching out of these boring textbooks. But I'm always thinking about the monetary history and the mining and the minting and all of this stuff. And so in these textbooks, what they do is, well, this one okay. So you run into money in two different places in the standard econ textbooks, any intro. There's a microeconomics that always comes at the front of the book. Even a macroeconomics book has 4 or 5 chapters on the laws of supply and demand. And then you've got the macroeconomics, you've got money. And it turns out that economists themselves, I think, are not aware of this, but the money, the dollar, in microeconomics versus the money, the dollar, let's say, in the macroeconomics part of the text, they actually contradict each other. They literally, they're not compatible at all. I never heard that in graduate school. I taught this stuff for decades, and no books ever talk about this as far as I can see. So it turns out that in microeconomics, if you remember the torture you went through if you took that intro, I mean, you've just got these supply and demand functions, and you've got a price over on the vertical axis, right? And typically, since the US is a big market for textbooks, it's going to say dollars. but it could be any money. And so it's got dollars per unit of pound of coffee or whatever the product is, okay? And economists, this part they understand is that microeconomics only has to do with relative prices. And what they mean by that is that if in their textbook illustration they show you $2 per cup of coffee versus $4 per glass of cheap wine, whether you put $2 per cup of coffee and $4 per wine, or you doubled both of them or cut them in half, doesn't really make any difference because the wine is twice as expensive as the coffee. That's the whole idea. So in microeconomics, it's the relative price of non-monetary goods is what micro is about. And it's only about that. Now, okay, so fine. But it turns out that the dollar in microeconomics that is in every textbook is an intangible dollar. It's a conceptual dollar, okay? It's a unit of account, but it doesn't physically exist. You with me so far? So, all right. So then we go to the macroeconomic side of the course. And after a few chapters, you come to money. And they model money. And the first thing that all econ textbooks say is, in order for something to be money, it has to fulfill three functions. Medium of exchange, you buy and sell with it. Unit of account, you measuring stick. And a store of value. Okay? So, and if the item has to fulfill all three functions, otherwise it ain't money. You'll be prosecuted to the full extent of the law of economics if you call it something money and it doesn't do all three of these. But the thing is, in order to be a store of value, a store that later on you've got it, right? It has to be tangible, clearly. In order to, the kroners in my pocket, in order to buy something at a store, the medium of exchange, I'm taking the product I'm buying and I'm physically handing them a tangible money, right? So in other words, in macroeconomics, the monies are, by definition, they have to be tangible, physical things that you can touch. In okay, but that's the definition of money, but that rules out money in microeconomics because it's an abstract unit of account only. It's not physical at all. So that's what I mean. You've got a contradiction between the definition of money in macroeconomics and the usage of money in microeconomics. So so here I am. I give you the graph after I've already stopped talking. Very smart. This is just an illustration using wine and bread that the actual dollar price on each of these axes, which is cut off on the left one anyway, doesn't matter. You can scale them up or scale them down because when you divide one price by the others, the dollars cancel out anyway. So then, in macroeconomics, here we go. We've got the medium of exchange, the unit of account. Let me make sure of how far I'm going here. I'm halfway through almost. So in macroeconomics, you have to have this. So, I mean, we just got a complete contradiction, right? And in macroeconomics, this is cut off at the bottom a bit, but in macroeconomics, the supply and demand functions look completely different than microeconomics. The money is a vertical stock, which that part is okay. And then they put the price of money becomes the interest rate. And this is the way Keynesian monetary theory works. But think about the three presentations before I got up here. We're talking about profits. We're talking about seniorage. We're talking about the value of bullion versus the value of the coin itself, right? These are the things that need to be explained. These are the things, you guys have got it right. I mean, these are the things that we need to understand, and they're very complicated. So what we need is a model that helps us understand that. What in the hell are you going to do with the interest rate? That doesn't tell you anything. The interest rate declines to the cost of production. It's ridiculous. An interest rate is a percentage per time period. I mean, this kind of logic has no applicability to what you're doing whatsoever. So no wonder there aren't a bunch of economists here enlightening you with their models. Their models frankly, are not useful to you at all. And I came to this realization some time ago. And so back in the 1980s, because of the inapplicability of standard economic theory, I teamed up with a colleague, Kerry Doherty. He died in 1990. He was a mathematical economist because I was trying to explain something very specific. And none of the models worked. They just simply, no matter what I did, you couldn't even approach the problem. So we developed an alternative theory, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about. And this one, I think, is very helpful to you. Unfortunately, what happens is that I hope that you'll read the paper, but the paper is, the paper, I tried to, as best I could to make it understandable, but I know it's difficult. But I think the reason it's difficult is because the subject matter is difficult. It's very complicated. So I'm going to try to get you through so you get the drift of what it is that I'm trying to say. And then it will be less painful when you read the paper. So it literally, this is going to sound completely crazy, but kind of by accident, certainly not by design, Kerry Doherty and I back in the 80s worked out this economic model to do something very specific. And we were shocked to find out after working years on this that the mathematics spat out these supply and demand functions, the demand side especially, and that there were 3 different supply functions and 3 different demand functions working in coordination with each other. So instead of the laws of supply and demand, the standard econ micro, you have the laws of supply and demand. There's one supply curve, one demand curve. That's it. In our case, we have 3 supply curves and 3 demand curves, but they're intuitive. They really are intuitive. So it goes like this. One supply, I call it inventory supply. It's just the amount of stuff that exists, whether it's coins or whatever the product is, okay? So it's a vertical at a point in time. You have so many pounds of coffee in your cupboard, right? That's the inventory supply. And what I call production supply, if other things equal, if you've got so many pounds of coffee and you produce some more coffee of that type, it's going to increase the stock. Makes sense, right? So over a month, you produce a whole bunch of coffee. Other things equal, you're not drinking coffee in the meantime. It's going to increase the amount of coffee there. Production supply increases the stock of the product. All right? Then, this is very intuitive, I think. And then there's sales supply. Sales supply. If I've got a big stock of coffee and I sell some of it, my stock shrinks. If I sell it, it doesn't belong to me anymore, right? So even though you see the graphs and it looks like, oh my God, what's going on there? Really, what it's saying is that production supply increases inventory. the inventory itself, I call inventory supply. If you sell the product off, it decreases inventory. But the funny part about it is in standard economics, the supply curve, that supply is both production supply and sales supply. They treat them as synonyms. How the hell can they be synonyms when production supply increases the stock and sales supply decreases the stock? They're not only not synonyms, they have the opposite function. Okay? Now, how about the demand side? Well, the demand side, there are three as well. I'm a wine drinker, so I'll use that as an example. So I wish to have 20 bottles of a certain kind of wine in my wine cellar, but I only have 12 bottles currently, and I wish to have 20. What would you suggest I do? Go down to the local store and hold them up with a gun. But that's not that's one way to increase your stock, but I don't recommend that. Normally, you go buy it, right? You go buy some. You wish to have 20 bottles, you've got 12 bottles. Well, that's purchase demand. Purchase demand builds up my stocks. So I go, if I wanted to hold 20 bottles and I currently held 12 bottles, I go buy 8 bottles and get the inventory back to where I want it to. But I also drink the wine. In fact, that's the reason I have the stock of it, right? And when I drink the wine, if I'm drinking, what am I at? Okay, so I'm going to have to accelerate here. So if I drink the wine, obviously it decreases the stock. So on the demand side, once again, we've got purchase demand increases the amount, the inventory. Consumption decreases the inventory. Standard economics says they're the same thing. Purchase demand and consumption demand are the same thing. Of course they're not the same thing. In fact, they have opposite functions. So this model, all right. So what happens is we have a model that has these inventories, which are wealth, really. Components of wealth get put to the forefront. And I'm down to what, about 4 minutes or so? Yeah, even less. Okay, so then what my ultimate objective is, and I claim to have succeeded, is I want to treat these monetary items that we study in history, these products, they're, in terms of metal monies, there are many kinds of monies, they're dug out of the ground, they're processed, the ores, they go through all kinds of processing. They go through the industrial process called minting. I mean, they're physical products, these tangible physical products, and I want to treat them exactly as the same as I would coffee or wine or anything else with these laws of supply and demand. Then the issue becomes, well, if you do that, and I claim to have succeeded, then how are you going to talk about the price of the money when prices are normally expressed in terms of the money? That's the conundrum. But I claim that over the last 4 or 5 years, last few years in particular, I finally figured out how to do this. And so it turns out that I have, well, I'm not even going to be able to get to, let's see, I'll just end with this. What I end up, and I've got a money here, a bullion market, and then this one happens to be a 1681 coin guilder. So I've got the coin guilder, a physical money, and I've got bullion over there too. And I'm expressing the price of everything in terms of what I call a RUAM. It's an acronym, R-U-A-M, a ratio unit of account money. It's intangible. So the coin guilder is a tangible money in 1681. It's down on the quantity axis. And I'm expressing the price of a tangible money in terms of an intangible money that I call a ratio unit of account money. Now, you might think, wait a minute, what kind of hocus pocus is this? This guy is talking about actual physical monies and quantities, and then is expressing their value in terms of an abstract unit of account, right? And I say, that's right. Well, you say, well, what makes you think you can get away with that? Because economists have been doing it in microeconomics for over a century. Remember I told you initially the micro side of the course, the laws of supply and demand? That abstract dollar per unit is a RUAM. They don't know it. Economists don't know this. But it actually is a RUAM, so in that respect, I thought I was inventing something, but actually it was already invented, but I didn't realize it. So if economists were to say, this guy, this nutcase from out in California, is coming up with this RUAM, who the hell ever heard of a RUAM? He doesn't know what he's doing. Well, if I don't know what I'm doing, then you don't know what you've been doing for the last century or so either, because the dollar you have in microeconomics, in fact, is a RUAM. The difference, and I'll stop here, the difference is that in my model, I've got the stocks, the inventory, right? And what is in the museum here? The remnants of inventories. That's what I'm interested in talking about. And the inventory of things, right, makes a difference. Why have oil prices come down in the last year so much? Partly new technology, fracking and all that stuff, increased the inventory, the stock. It's the stock of oil and the stock demand for oil that drives the price. The production feeds into the stock. The burning it in your automobile decreases the stock, right? But it's the inventory, and that's a component of wealth, and I'm going to stop there because I went 2 minutes over.